So when we talked earlier about implied fives in the context of Autumn Leaves, any one of these potentially could be an extension of a 5 chord. So if I were playing, for example, let's actually take Autumn Leaves. We could take, well actually we don't have a C7 in Autumn Leaves. Let's take the first dominant chord that we have in the progression as written, which would be F7. If I want to introduce a lot of tension in the context of this 2-5-1, I could play the melodic minor a half step above. So if I play C minor and F sharp melodic minor to my B flat. So Dennis was playing a basic F dominant, but I was playing F sharp melodic minor. In a real playing situation, Dennis would probably also add some of the same tensions that I was playing. But I think what we're trying to demonstrate here by Dennis playing the basic chord is if the tensions can work if you're resolving it back to something that's more consonant so that there's a reasonable match between the accompaniment and the tensions of the line. So any 2-5-1, the 5 chord could potentially be melodic minor a half step above, a whole tone below, a 4th or 5th above. If I decide to dial in less tension, I might play the melodic minor a whole tone below for the 13 with a flat 9. So now it would be C minor, E flat melodic minor to my B flat. So this is less tension. Now if I factor those tensions into the chords, C minor, F13, flat 9. So we have all these different possibilities of dominant. The beauty of this is you're not having to learn lots of separate chord fingerings and arpeggios to generate all these different combinations of tensions. We're simply transposing melodic minor information through 4 keys relative to one dominant chord. So in the case of Autumn Leaves, F7 could be F sharp melodic minor, E flat melodic minor, B flat, or C melodic minor. In my initial example talking about C dominant, we're talking about C sharp, B flat, F, and G melodic minor. Here's your job. Begin to build vocabulary with melodic minor. Start with the basic melodic minor arpeggio, 1, flat 3, 5, 7. Maybe C sharp is maybe a difficult key for you to envision initially. So take a C major, make it melodic minor. We're simply dropping the E down to an E flat. Now we can also, to create a slightly extended version of melodic minor, we can pull a few other notes in from the scale. For example, if I want to play a minor major 6, I could also add the A. So now I have C, E flat, G, A. Could this also work over the dominant? Sure, if I go a half step above, over C7. So essentially melodic minor vocabulary, as you expand it, of course works over the minor chord, but it also works as part of this altered dominant scenario. Let's go back to the key of C. It might be an easier one to have you begin to practice ideas with melodic minor. So I've now added the A natural to the arpeggio. I could add a D, then it's minor major 9. So I've added the D. So we can begin to expand our melodic minor vocabulary by pulling in a few of the notes from the melodic minor scale into the arpeggios. Basic arpeggio, which will actually get you in the door initially with tensions over dominant, just play 1, flat 3, 5, and 7 in those 4 keys we discussed, half above, whole below, 4th, and 5th above. So if I'm taking C7 and a C sharp melodic minor, B flat melodic minor, F, and G, that's just the really simple basic melodic minor arpeggio. That's introducing plenty of tension over the dominant. But as I said earlier, just a minute ago, we can begin to pull in some other notes of the melodic minor scale to create a modified arpeggio. If that feels like too much to work on initially, just take your basic melodic minor arpeggio, 1, flat 3, 5, and 7, and then combine that into the various keys with C dominant. And as I mentioned earlier, we also have C sharp and B flat major. This all relates to tensions over dominant. This can relate to an implied 5. Anytime you see a 5 chord or you want to add a 5 chord, all these sounds apply. And the purpose being to use tension to create resolution. Sometimes the dominant chord in a modern jazz song is not necessarily functioning as a 5 chord. These tensions can still apply just in terms of extending the basic dominant tonality. But typically with a dominant chord, these tensions are used to create resolution. And the dominant chord is the only one of the different chord qualities where tensions create movement. We can have tensions over major and minor, which we'll talk about here shortly. Those don't necessarily lead us anywhere. That just essentially expands the sound. With a dominant chord, a C7 flat 9 can lead you to an F. A C minor with a flat 9 as a Phrygian is not going to lead you anywhere. It's just a variation on C minor. So I would say initially, slowly go back and forth between the basic dominant arpeggio and the basic melodic minor arpeggio in these different keys we mentioned, a half above, whole below, fourth, and fifth above. And you begin to hear how these tensions can essentially begin to be introduced over the basic dominant tonality, which then can function in a 2-5-1. As you get comfortable with the individual sounds, it's also possible to combine them. For instance, if I'm taking F and G melodic minor over C7, it kind of sounds like a modified whole tone scale, although it does have the perfect fifth in it. So if I take a C7, basic, and then this is playing a basic C dominant. Now here is F melodic minor, and here's G melodic minor. If I put those two together, here's a straight whole tone scale. Actually, I'm not crazy about that scale because it's so pattern oriented. You can come up with some ideas for that scale, but it's very, very symmetrical sounding. There's some clever, some of those kinds of shapes where you're just using chord shapes to make something that's a little less predictable than the scale. But to me, it sounds not so melodic. If I hear melodic minors, a fourth and a fifth above, I can get away from some of the patterns that are quite so symmetrical. And it's still, even though it's not a perfect whole tone scale, because it does have the perfect fifth in it. A whole tone scale by definition is 1, 2, 3, sharp 4, sharp 5. That's the whole tone scale. And both melodic minors have the fifth in it. So it's not, strictly speaking, a perfect whole tone scale, but it does have the raised and lowered 5 in it. So it gives me that whole tone sound without being so locked into the whole tone patterns, which is why I like it better. So rather than doing this, it's this. Those are just melodic minor chords instead of the whole tone shapes, which to me sound pretty symmetrical and a little bit predictable. So that still has enough of the feeling of the whole tone for me. So there's my F melodic minor, my G. Don't worry about the sounds I'm playing, just hear the sound. G melodic minor, F melodic minor. So that's giving me elements of raised and lowered 5. So this is a way to kind of solve this dilemma of a scale that's so pattern oriented that it's tough to create melodies there, I think. It's not impossible to play melodically with a whole tone scale, but to me it's pretty difficult. I like this idea of melodic minor a whole step apart, a fourth and a fifth above the dominant to give me that sound instead.